is Brianna Carey. I am a relationship and intimacy coach with 16 years of experience as a sexual health educator. So that's a whole other like path we can go down if you ever want to. And yeah, I've been married to my college sweetheart for 17 years. We have two kiddos, 8 and 5. And, I got to where I am today because of all of those life experiences. Um, yeah, so like we were talking about earlier, we're both podcasters. So I do have a podcast as well, Intimacy Evolution, intimacyevolution.com. You guys can go check that out later. But yeah, let's jump in.
Absolutely. And please, guys, please check out our podcast. I've seen a few episodes and it's fantastic. And we actually have a mutual guest that we both shared. So I think that leads us into exactly what we wanted to touch on and
Mhm.
take us right from the beginning, Brianna. How did you get started in this and why?
Yes. Okay. So, like I said, I have 16 years of experience as a sexual health educator. And however, when I had my first kiddo in 2015, I didn't realize how much that was actually going to be needed because we're not taught a lot about when we have babies. What happens after that? Specifically to your relationship, right? We know there's going to be a change and things like that, but um, I experienced some trauma during my birth, and with that, I had a lot of pain. And my midwife's suggestion was to drink a few glasses of wine to relax and use plenty of lubrication. And I know I'm not alone in that diagnosis or recommendation. I know that is given to thousands, if not millions, of women every time they have a baby, and it's just so disheartening. And so, for my husband and I, we really had to lean into our communication and figure out how to get back to not just physical intimacy, but like that emotional connection again. And my husband's background is he's a licensed professional counselor. And so he's had a private practice for 10 years. And so I had to lean into my sexual health knowledge, and he was, going into his psychology, profession, and we collaborated to get to where we are today and supporting couples in nurturing their relationship while they raise their tiny babies or their tiny humans basically.
Looking at the background of yourself as well as your husband,
Mhm.
at at that time, was it easier for you to navigate that scenario because you both have the professional and personal experiences, or is it similar to what a lot of people go to and they're like, okay, we're still trying to figure it out regardless of our backgrounds?
Still today, we have things that come up. We are human. We have things that triggers and stressors and all those things that come up. But what I do notice with us and our relationship, because of all of the practice and work that we have put in, and I'll get to like the beginning part. Um, it Today, those conflicts are a lot easier to navigate now. We can move through them because it's not about avoiding conflict in your relationship. It's navigating them, getting through the other side and creating that connection again and doing that quickly. So, when we had our son at the beginning, it was not as easy because we really had to like pull back and dissect every single thing that was happening. And I mean, I can get into some examples and things if you'd like, but we really just had to like hold a magnifying glass up to our relationship and up to our um responses to one another and really see like, this is from childhood. I respond this way because of this. And how can we do this differently? And so it took a lot of work. And then again, having another baby, 4 years later, things always change a little bit again. But again, we had that foundation to help us get through those conversations a lot quicker.
I remember the first time that I did that and I held a magnifying glass to myself, or I just looked in the mirror and I just decided, is there something more that I wanted? It was a
Mm,
very humbling experience because for the first time, and maybe you went through this and your husband went through this, I was like, okay, this is my fault. That is my fault. Versus
mm-hmm.
me saying that, well, it's my fault because of the other person did this and
Mm-hmm.
I just reacted. So when I
Yeah.
went through that experience, one of the first things I did, um, besides taking some time away to be like, oh my God, I am this person
Yeah.
was I started to ask the type of women what is it that they look for. So instead of
Mhm.
having a conversation within my echo chamber, my mind, as well
Yeah.
as my friends who are saying, Train, you're the perfect guy. Every girl will want you. I was like, well, every girl doesn't. Let's be humble. Let's be
Right.
honest,
Right.
right? Right? Like, if I'm not what's his name? I'm not Leonardo DiCaprio. As soon as I step outside my house, I'm not beating them off,
Right.
ladies 25 and under, because that's all he wants. But that's a topic for another day. But what I realized was I needed to hear the other side. And I
Mhm.
think that is what is missing in general, but that was definitely missing for me. So when you're bouncing the situation off of your husband,
Mhm.
or when you're working with these other people, are they missing that secondary piece where it's like they can bounce ideas from the other person? Because a lot of times when it ends or when it goes bad, we turn inward instead of looking outward.
Yes, yes, and I wanna expand on that a little bit too, and say what I realized for myself and for couples that we work with is that we are taught to listen to respond rather than actively listening and being present with someone. And so you're like, "Well, how am I gonna, like" and no, you don't always need to respond. And so once you take that defensiveness, because that's what it is, you're listening to give a rebuttal to what they're saying. And when you remove that defensiveness and you're able to just really sit and listen to the other person, one, that is just such a gift for both of you. Um, and then you realize that communication is a lot smoother in that way as well. It's not transactional. It's it's a collaboration, a conversation. you know?
And I think that's what's missing because we talked about it, right? Like we're taught how to talk,
Uh-huh.
say our first words, say mom, dad, so on and so forth. But as you mentioned, to listen to understand, that is so difficult. There was someone, this is a friend, he was asking me a question, and I said two words, and he was already talking. And I told him, I was like, you didn't even wait for my answer. He's like,
Yeah.
well, I know what you're gonna say. So I was like, so let me excuse myself from the conversation. He's
Yeah.
like, no, 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 I want to hear what you have to say. I was like, you don't, because your behavior shows that you
Yeah.
actually don't. And one thing that really kind of caught my attention is that he would listen to respond, but he would get angry.
Mhm.
So I told him that's a bit dangerous because and he asked me why, and I said, well, look at it from a woman's perspective. In general, women are weaker than men. They're not built the same way. They're not as big, right?
Right.
So I said, if you're going through a disagreement, it's already emotionally filled, right? And it could be scary
Mm.
for a lot of people. But now someone is asking you questions or you're asking questions and you're just responding and then you're getting upset because of the way you're responding. So how do you
Mhm.
think the women is going to take that? Right? So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that situation?
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so many ways we can go this. So, my first response, my first initial thought is, hold on, it just went away from me. So when we are in that moment where, again, emotions are high, um, you're creating a story for yourself because again, you're preparing yourself to defend yourself. Um, and so one thing that we like to say is, the story I'm telling myself, what I'm hearing and what I'm telling myself is this. And it allows them to hear because we are two separate humans with different experiences in life, which gives us different perspectives. Like obviously we're going to see situations differently. And so, and communication styles differ from person to person, and yeah, so if somebody is coming off, defensive, that can be scary for somebody. If they're saying, well, why aren't you answering me? Like, sometimes people really need some extra time to reflect. And so there's like a whole like thing that we can talk about there too about listening, being present. This is the story I'm telling myself. Am I hearing that correctly? Or if somebody is like giving a big share and somebody's like, I'm very overwhelmed right now. I need a moment to pause so I can really reflect on what you just shared and then come back. And so again, communicating that and not just leaving, being like, I'm done with this, like getting exaggerative, right? You can't do that. It's like, whoa, I just need a pause. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I want to give what you shared a lot of thought. And so those are some things that kind of help when you find yourself in those like more heated moments for sure.
What are some of the ways that you suggest that people would pause to reflect in those motions? As we both discussed, emotions are very high,
Mm-hmm.
where some people may be defensive, their guard is up. So, how would we pause and reflect in those moments?
Yeah. So having the conversation before there's even conflict, saying, like, hey, I notice when we have conflict or arguments, it always, ends in the same way. We don't get anywhere. And what I would like to try is like having some sort of code word or a signal that we can use so that way, because I notice I get very overwhelmed in those moments. And so for me, I would like to take a pause. Here's a code word, or here's a symbol that I can do. And that's a sign for the other person to be like, oh, okay, they're not just leaving. Like, because when you're in that moment and you're trying to defend yourself, you're like, no, you're not leaving. Like, we're gonna finish this. Um, that they're coming back and say, like, let's just set 10 minutes, take a breather, go walk outside, do something for yourself, listen to music, whatever you need to do, and then have a time to come back. So plan that ahead of time because you're not going to remember in the moment. You're going to be again very overwhelmed and flustered. Um, and so yeah, come up with a word that works for you guys. Maybe it's not a word that's, it's maybe it's an inside joke that because bringing humor into these moments can also be very impactful to de-escalating the situations. And if you do have one person in the relationship where they're trying to crack jokes and you're like, why are you making a joke right now? Like we're in a serious discussion. That's subconsciously their way of actually trying to bring the relationship back to repair and trying to de-escalate that. Again, just a little perspective shift helps. Um, so yeah, I would just have that conversation before and then figure out what your code word or symbol will be when those moments come up.
I like the code word idea because it reminds me of some of my female friends when they have a bad date, they say pineapple or they'll
Yeah.
text pineapple. They'll be like, okay, the troops have to send them in, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I like that, it gives everyone an opportunity to say, okay, this is becoming a bit much for whomever is
Mm-hmm.
using it.
Yes.
And let's give ourselves some distance. And ladies and gentlemen, when we say distance, we mean distance from each other, but still in the same space,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because this doesn't mean that Tyrone down the street, you're gonna go over to Tyrone's house and be like, "Well, I'm gonna get all the distance I want." We're not talking. It's not. That's
No,
not code for
no.
something else,
Right, right. No, no.
right?
Just go for a walk around the house. Just go sit outside.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we do that and we give each other some space, we discussed that it has to be like physical space as well. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it's emotional and mental space too. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And that's why like getting outside, being grounded in nature or listening to music, really helps you to just kind of shift your, from emotional to, the logical side of your brain so you can start processing. Um, just any sort of movement that helps you. You could even journal a little bit if you want to. If that's like your go-to, you can journal because again, it's shifting how your brain is processing and it allows you to really come back to like a neutral point.
There was an argument that I had with my girlfriend, and we at the time, sorry, we were discussing how we're going to resolve this, and we gave each other some space because we're communicating over the phone. And one thing we did was we planned something together so we can be away from everything else.
Yeah.
And that gave us the opportunity to discuss when we were ready. So we didn't discuss it the first day. We still were at this area. So we rented an Airbnb for a couple of days and we just planned it.
Mm-hmm.
What I really enjoyed about that is that when we decided to have the conversation, we both were ready to have it, and there wasn't any outside distractions
Yeah.
on either side. You know,
Yeah.
like cell phones are a big one, or social media. Like,
Mhm.
how many times you probably see where people will argue and you see they're literally on their phone, like, yeah, yeah, I hate
Scrolling.
you, and I don't like that you did this, and they're scrolling. And when you
Yeah.
look at what they're scrolling, it's like, really, this is what you're you're
Yeah,
looking
that's
at
what you're
as
focusing
there's
on.
that's what you're focusing on, right? So is that a commonality that you see, that when people are still trying to resolve their issue, there's still those distractions, such as the cell phone, such as the social media, impacting maybe some of the goals that they want to set to lessen the situation from happening again, or even reducing it altogether?
That's a great question. Um, I think the big thing that I see a lot of times is like not like you guys did. You set time aside and were very intentional about coming back to this space. And I think because of life today, things are chaotic and it's really hard to find that time together. And again, we specialize in a lot of like working with couples with kids. And so it's like exhausted. We don't ever have time without the kids. And so like they're having these like half conversations that aren't being fully like, dealt with. And so I think that's what I see a lot is it's not, there are distractions. Um, and it's, yeah, it's about creating the intentionality around that because this is your person and you want to make sure that you're like getting this stuff taken care of because otherwise it just creates fissures in the relationship. And then those cracks in the foundation won't support you any longer.
Yes, yes, because they say, like, some people say that children changes a relationship in so many ways. But even though I don't have children, and some of the people that I've interviewed or some of the women that I've worked with, because I mostly work with women who have children,
Mm,
when you have a healthy relationship, it changes it in so many positive ways, right? But it seems that some
mhm.
people who have an unhealthy relationship, it changes it in so many negative ways. Do you see that as well, since you work with couples with children?
Yeah, and again, what we typically we have one role model for a relationship in our lives, our parents. And however that happened in your life, that whatever that relationship looked like, you either know strongly, oh, yeah, that's exactly a relationship I want to model mine after, or nope, that is absolutely not what I want to do. And so you can talk about all of the ways that you're going to raise your children and do all these things, but like subconsciously, how you were raised when you were a child starts to come up in different moments. And that's why we say, like, you say a phrase that your parents used to say, and you're like, oh, I didn't know where that came from. Like, I haven't heard that in years. Um, yeah, having children. So your partner's a mirror, but the children are the magnifying glass on your relationship. And it takes effort by both parties. Relationships are not easy. They're not meant to be, right? They're challenging. You're evolving all the time. And yeah, anytime you put somebody, add somebody into your relationship, that dynamic shifts. And the greatest thing that you can do for your children is to have a really strong relationship and work on your communication because, again, you're their role model of what their future relationships will look like. And so making your relationship a priority is a must. And I know people are like, oh, like I'm supposed to like neglect my children. No, no, no. But your partner is your first, you're your first priority, your partner's your next priority, and then your children are next. Because again, when they see their happy parents, they're happy. They get to feel that energy, and that is good for them. I think I answered that a little bit.
No, I love that answer because I view it exactly the same way. Because I think sometimes people get it reversed, right? Like, if I take like a man, if I take me,
Mhm,
right? I'm terrain. Then when I get in a relationship, I'm terrain in a relationship. So there might be a difference, right?
mhm,
I'm terrain as a single man. I'm terrain as a husband. Then I'm terrain as
yeah,
a father. So because, and for those who are single parents, I know you're going to hate me for this, but because the normal order of things is still single man, married, then children,
yeah,
because it's the last step in the relationship, they only remember themselves or see themselves as a father or as a mother,
mhm,
but they
mhm,
don't see themselves as, okay, I'm a husband too. I'm a wife
yeah,
too. I am terrain as well. I'm
Yeah.
Brianna, right? How do you help them to remember that they were someone before each
Mm.
next step in their marriage or in their relationship?
Yes, we have them make lists of hobbies that they want to do. You know, what are things that you did before you had kids? What are things that you did before your relationship? Or what are some new things that you want to try? You know, we literally just have them think about it and do homework basically, write these things down and then they go and try these things because we do forget and it sounds so silly, but we almost need that permission. Like, oh, I can go do this for myself. Like release the guilt. You're not being selfish. I know I am a much better mom. I am a much better wife when I am taking time for myself, whether that is going for a walk, going to a coffee shop, and just having a quiet time for an hour to myself, hanging out with my girlfriends. Like, I am more resourced. That's filling my cup, and I get to be better for those other people in my life as well as myself because it just, again, fills my cup. And so, and we tell couples too, um, you know, even if you don't have children, but think about like when you first started dating, it was so exciting. You had all of these different experiences that you wanted to know about each other. But then when you get into a relationship and you've been together for a long time, you have a lot more shared experiences, which are equally as important. But you might stop doing the separate experiences. And then it can get a little boring like, oh, I already know you did that. Oh, okay, I know you did that, right? Like having these separate experiences keeps the relationship exciting again because you get to have these conversations that you're not both a part of all the time. And so putting it in that perspective, I think is a little bit easier for people because they're like, no, they're my person. I want to be with them all the time. I'm like, yes, but you're also you. Who are you? Go live your life too. And then you have more to talk about when you get together at dinner or whatever. So,
I think that's a beautiful point because it reminds me of sometimes like when you go on, let's say, message boards and you see the on some of the online community talk about relationships, and one of the biggest hang up from a male perspective is that I don't want to date an older woman because nothing is new, right? Similar to your
mm,
point, right? Like she's been on the road trip, she has the kids, she has this other all this other stuff. But what some people or a lot of people seem to forget is that you can recreate scenarios, right? Like just because I've been to Las Vegas with Jane doesn't mean I did every single thing and experienced every single part of Las Vegas. Or it could have
right.
simply been I went to Las Vegas with that person for this reason. I'm going to Las Vegas with Joanne for this reason. Two
Mhm.
different people, two different times. I can be a different terrain than
Yeah.
and difference, right? So,
Yeah.
how important is it for the couples to, especially if they have children, to remember you're
Mm.
someone before you had children, recreate the passion because ultimately, as you pointed out, right, it's their
Mhm.
responsibility regardless of the dynamic of their relationship.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. And, you know, we talk about it all the time is that we've had to recreate our relationship multiple times over 17 years of being together. You know, who I am today is not who I was in college, you know, thank goodness sometimes. You know, it's not who we were when we got married. It's not who we were like it is again, if you we hear it, you know, I hear this, well, they're not the person that I married. I'm like, I sure hope they're not because you should be growing and evolving and experiencing life. And if you're not, then like you need to shake things up a bit, you know? And so it is super important because that, in my mind, like you're just experiencing life that way. Like you should be recreating your relationship over and over and you keep finding your way back to each other and then it just makes it even stronger. Like, yeah. And it could be the said for like, you know, just any life changes, a job change, you know, a loss of a friend or a family member, you know, moving and then you know, you're separated from friends and family, right? Because you have you move across the country or whatever. All of these things is going to alter your relationship. And that's okay. It's about how you stay connected and navigate those experiences together.
Do you think that is missing in a lot of relationship, the growing with the person and not staying complacent or stagnant?
Yeah. What I have found is there's always one person in the relationship that tends to start leading that path. We're like, okay, we've been here. We're kind of like stagnant, like, and they start their journey of growth and whatever that may look like. Like, I'm going to go have girls' night once a week. And, because I need that in my life. But then the other person is not doing anything for themselves. And so that can start to cause some like resentment and conflict. And so there's usually one person in the relationship that's leading that evolution. And then it's, is that other person going to see that and be like, oh, okay, well, they're a lot happier. They're doing well. Well, yeah, you know what? I've been wanting to do this thing. So, like, hey, on this night, I'm going to go do this. And it can be inspiring for them, or they can allow it to fester and they can be like, you know, and again, that could be like childhood stuff, things that, come up from that of why they don't um, think of themselves and put themselves first and whatnot. But yeah.
I think so as well. I look back at when I was in my 20s, so probably let's say 10, just over 10 years ago. I look back on when I wanted to become a personal trainer.
Mm,
And the person I was with at that time, we were fine. And then when I started discussing that, she was happy in the beginning, but then I forgot what movie we watched. We
mm.
watched this movie where there's this married couple and the guy was a personal trainer. And then they were showing him training these women. And, it was like a romance comedy. So they're in all these awkward poses and everything.
Yeah.
So eventually she's like, oh, train, you want to be a personal trainer? I was like, yeah, something I think about. She's like, well, if you do it, you can't have any female clients. And I was like,
Yeah.
at the beginning, I was like, why? But then I remembered
Right.
the movie. And I wonder how many people let outside
Mm,
factors influence how much growth their partner can achieve.
yes.
Right? Do you see that as well?
Yeah. Quite a bit. Yeah. People, again, and that can be insecurity, right? Because they're not feeling connected to their partner already. There's not a connection. And so they start to see all of these outside entities as threats to their relationship because they're already not in a stable place. And so I think when you start to like delve into those, okay, what am I really feeling here? What's the real fear that is coming up for me? Okay, so when did I first notice this? You can start walking through all of these things to realize like, okay, it's not actually, him working with these women and being a personal trainer doing his job. It's that blah, 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 whatever story they're creating for themselves of probably something that they learned growing up or witnessed or whatever, or experienced in another relationship starts to come up. And so just remembering that they are different people, different experiences, and you can work through it.
What role would the person who is looking to grow in that way play in, let's say, reassuring their
Mm.
partner?
Oh, that is a good question. And I'm a little conflicted because part of it is you can say all of the things that they need to hear, you think they need to hear to reassure them, but if they are not in a place of mm, it's not necessarily trusting their partner, but it's trusting themselves in that. And if they're not able to show up and really share how they're feeling or what their true fear is, then they can't ever be reassured. It's just going to be around and around and around. So I know that's not really like it's kind of like not a fun answer. Um, because they have to take ownership of why they're not feeling safe. And so maybe it could just simply be that question. It's like, what do you need for you to feel okay with this? Or what is really coming up for you right now? And then that allows those layers to be peeled back so you can get to the root of what is actually coming up. So maybe that.
Yes, yes. I think that is a fantastic first step because I would ask, and that's what I did in my situation. I asked, "What's the source of this?"
Mhm.
And the person gave me their example or their situation. But then that was me in it.
Yeah.
Now I on the outside looking like in on some of these other relationships, my answer changes. Like I would
Ooh.
feel, and I guess maybe this is like maybe a gender thing. I
Okay.
would feel that the man should be reassuring,
Mm.
right? And maybe that's me thinking, okay, I'm the protector. I'm the oh, right? That's the source
Yes.
of that.
Yes.
But when I was in it, that wasn't necessarily what I was thinking. And I was
Mhm.
much younger and now I'm more experienced and I do all this.
Yeah.
Right. And I have so I'm so much more experience.
Mhm.
But I think reassurance is key. But I think to your point,
Yeah.
like when I look at what you just shared, I was like how much reassurance can you possibly give if you don't know the person, if you don't know the amount of reassurance that they need? And if
Yes.
they're not right, if they're not forthcoming, is it simply that I don't trust myself enough to trust Brianna to do what is right by me?
Mhm.
Or is it that I don't trust Brianna at all?
Right.
Right? Like, which one
Yeah.
do you think is easier to come to terms with?
Right. If we always wanna put the blame on others, right? It's
Oh,
easier to
it's
put
always
it's
there.
easier to
It's
do
easier.
that, right? Instead of looking in and reflecting and, um, it's really challenging to, like, own your shit. You're
Yeah.
like, "Ooh, yep, I was the one that started that. I'm sorry," or, "I can see how this, transpired, and I wasn't my best self in that moment, and I'm sorry." Those words are hard sometimes. "I'm sorry." Yeah. Um, yeah, and I you said something about, the gender perspective of being the male and being a protector, and I think that is something that is again, it could be a whole other conversation on masculinity and femininity, the energy within a relationship and how women I'm speaking kind of from my, um, age range is like kind of one of the millennial, older millennial, um, we grew up in the boss babe hustle culture, like, I don't need no man, I can do everything myself, like, we've been holding so much masculine energy for a long time, and it's exhausting. And so leaning into a partnership where you have a strong male presence that you can surrender and release that weight, it's very vulnerable. It's very vulnerable, and it's
I
needed.
think that is, yeah, I think that is so scary. Like, especially when you gave the perspective of our generation, right? And it's masculine energy almost everywhere you look, regardless,
We are so off balance right now.
right? Yeah, right. And it's like, okay, who's gonna be vulnerable? The man
Mhm.
who most of his life was told that the only emotion we experience is anger,
Uh-huh.
right? Or the women who's you're allowed to experience every emotion but anger.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. So who's gonna yield first? The person, the man,
Yeah.
the woman, and we're talking like heterosexual relationships, right? So
Yeah.
at that point, what do you ultimately do? Because someone has to be vulnerable first. And
Mhm.
if you're one of those people that have had bad dating experiences, and you probably heard of so many people in our generation having bad dating experiences because it's just swipe left, swipe right, right?
Yes.
They're like, as soon as I let my guard down, he does this. As soon as I trust her my
Mm.
emotions, she does that. I'm like, okay, but is it that everybody is bad, or is it that you're attracting the bad? That's
Right.
what would you say to that?
Yeah, it's kinda like that, analogy of like, you're thinking about buying a red car and then all of a sudden you see all the red cars on the road, right? It's the same, if you're looking for those things, you will see those things in those people and it is the energy you're putting out. And so, it's again, internal reflection what's my part in this? Because at the end, there's a common denominator in those, scenarios. And it's like, what am I putting out? What do I want to bring in? Where's the shift that needs to happen? And am I willing to put in the effort to do that? And if not, then okay, then you're going to keep getting the same results, but like, stop complaining about it.
Yeah, it's like the people complain but don't change,
Yes. Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
mentioned one thing earlier where it came down to communication. Is it more difficult to have communication with others or communication with yourself when you're trying to figure out what is going wrong?
Oh. Mm. I, ooh. If you're just sitting by yourself, sometimes I'll have some good things like when I'm journaling and whatnot, but you can start to spiral if you haven't done a lot of practice with like doing that internal reflection and acknowledging things. I think that's why it's great to have supportive friendships where they're kind of sounding boards because as soon as you say something, you're like, oh, I hear how that came out. Or you have that like, aha, you're like, oh, now I get it. This is why this has been happening because I did this. Or it's a little bit easier to have like those sounding boards. And the more you're able to have those conversations, the easier it gets for you to start having those conversations with yourself, whether you're, meditating, journaling, or just, you know, thinking about things, it comes to you a lot easier, I would say.
I was reading an article where they're saying that a lot of younger men in their 20s are spending more time amongst themselves because they're not really navigating towards women because they feel that women are a distraction and they're all evil, for lack of a
Okay.
better word, right?
Okay.
Um, and the interesting thing about it is that one person said that as a man who's growing up, who's trying to navigate the life and find out where his place is, if you're not spending time with women, how will you ever learn to speak with or to women? Because you can't learn that from other men that are doing what you're doing. And
Yeah.
I guess the vice versa is true. So it goes back to the point that, or the question, and the way you answered it is that, is it easier for me to communicate with the other person or communicate with myself? Because if you
Mm,
isolate yourself away from what you want to communicate with, you
yeah.
will never learn to communicate. So, what do you think are some of the stumbling blocks, or maybe the source of our fear
Mm.
of saying that, okay, I'm wrong, but I need to understand how am I going to communicate that? Because I can talk to myself all day long, but how am I going to take that first step forward and speak to the person?
Yeah. Okay, so let me double check that I've got the question. How do we have that like we can have the conversation with ourselves, but how do we bring that to someone else? Is that
Yeah, how would you bring it to someone else, especially
okay.
when we've surrounded ourselves with everyone who's like-minded and
Yeah,
we don't have any, at least from a male
like
perspective,
different perspectives.
we don't have the perspective, so we don't even know how to even
Mm,
start the conversation because we're never around women, for example, or women are no
yeah.
longer around men.
Yeah. I know it's wild times. Just being honest and know that it might be a little clunky. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. It could be, hey, I noticed you were wearing this shirt and you know what? I thought that was pretty cool. Like I just getting over um the fear of what somebody's going to think of you. If we're talking in like the, broad scenario, I feel like you're trying to, just talk and date somebody and have conversations and stuff like that. Like just get over it. Like they're either going to like be like, "Oh, hey, that's pretty cool of you to like, take the initiative and do that." Um Or if they're like, well, that was weird, like they're clearly not your person and it's okay. And do it again. And, just keep practicing that until you find somebody that's like, hey, that was really cool. Like, and that is a good frequency with you, and then you can have a conversation. Like, I think we just again, we create stories in our head of what we think people are going to do or what they're going to say. And that holds us back more than anything. And so, like, get rid of the story, tap into your gut, your intuition, whatever you want to call it, and just be like, if you get that nudge to do something, like lean into it and just be like, hey, I really, and it doesn't even have to be anything. Like, hey, I really liked their purse or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't know. But just go say it. And like, even with women, because women have a hard time talking to women too, because we're pitted against each other in society, right? Like we're taught that we can't be friends and we have to fight against each other. So again, just go say like, "Hey girl, like I really love your hair. It looks great today." Like that fills you up. Like and it feels good to say it. It feels good to receive it and then move on. Like or if you start a conversation, great. Doesn't have to be hard. We make it more difficult than it needs to be. Really, we do.
Do you think we've spent so much time perfecting our self image that we're afraid to be awkward to have those types of conversations?
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh gosh, I've been working on that like my whole life. I've it's a challenge. And nobody is paying attention to you like you think they are. Nobody cares more about you than you care about you. So like, I don't know. I love my 30s. I'm almost in my 40s now and it's just so liberating. So like I know you go through these experiences in your 20s. If that's where you're at right now, like it's going to be awkward. Don't make it a bigger deal than it is. And I promise your 30s are so liberating and you really don't care.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad you said that because my 20s, I look back and I can categorize it as I was just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I look at my 30s and I'm like, oh,
Yeah. It feels
right?
so good. Oh my gosh, it
Oh,
feels so good.
it gets so much better. I know some people are like, 30s is old. No, you don't know. 30s is, I love my 30s
Yeah.
so much. And if this is an indication of what my 40s is going to be like, I'm going to love my 40s even more
Yes.
because I realize one, I knew nothing in my 20s,
Yep.
right? Two, I realize, okay, I still have time to know what I want to know and to lead a successful life. And
Yes.
three, I finally found out that, hey, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok isn't real life. I don't need a
No.
thousand people as friends. I don't need 10,000. I don't need anything like that. I need that core people that's very engaged in my life, very
Mhm.
supportive. And one question I want to ask you, because most of the women that I've dated have children. And
Mhm.
since you work with couples who have children, what are a question that I would have would be if you have someone that's coming into a relationship, they're dating someone that has children,
Mhm.
what kind of advice can you give that person to understand that their perspective, the person with children, may be initially different than yours because they have children and you don't, and they're kind of blending into a situation with
Yeah. I think the thing that is most challenging is time. And their time is going to be different because they're going to be taking care of their children and depending on what custody, and stuff is. And so if they have children all the time, then they have limited time. And how can you then make that plan, take the initiative to make plans that, how am I wanting to say it? Understanding that their timing is limited and be intentional with the time that you spend with them. That's what I'm wanting to say. And so we tell couples to do weekly check-ins with each other and like plan ahead of time. When do we want to see each other? Because guarantee she knows what her schedule is and she can tell you like, "Hey, actually I'm free at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. Do you want to meet for lunch?" And if you're serious about getting to know her or being in the relationship with her, like, then you can try to prioritize that and be like, hey, I already have a meeting, but what other day works for you? And I guess just taking that initiative and knowing that you're going to have to put a little bit more effort in. Um, and I bet that will go a long ways with her that you acknowledge her time constraint, but you're showing up and being intentional with it. I guess. Does that
sometimes I
make sense?
think, yeah, it does because I want to touch on because two of my friends are both teachers
Mm-hmm.
and they're both single parents. They're divorced. I shouldn't say single parents, but I still consider there's a difference.
Yeah.
But that's their number one complaint, at least when they share it with me, is that the other person, the men in these cases, when they go on these
Hmm.
dates, they don't necessarily understand because in both scenarios, they have their children every other week,
Right.
right? So one child is she's going to be going off to college and university, so she's old enough to care for herself. The other one is
Yeah.
about 8 or 10, so she still
Oh.
needs the guidance. But one thing that I did notice when they share these stories is, to your point, there isn't the follow up. And I want the men and the women to understand is
Hmm.
when you can't make a date, let's say, for example, someone says, I'm free at 11 a.m. on the Tuesday. Do you want to meet for lunch?
Yeah.
Right. If you say no and there's no follow up, that shows
Yeah.
you're not interested. Like,
Right.
right. Like, stress to us,
Like
how
a shutdown,
important,
like just
yeah, how important is the follow up?
yeah, so important because like yeah, it's like it feels like you're shut down. You're like, no, that doesn't work. Like, oh, okay. So we're just like gonna leave it there? Like, yeah, you're in that limbo and like then do I come back and say, "Oh, well, do you want to look at a different day?" So like, yeah, like take the initiative and show that like you understand, where they're at or like, "Oh, hey, I know that you're if you know they have their kids every other week, like plan ahead." Like that will go so far. And again, like just taking one more thing off of her plate that she doesn't have to do or think about. Be like, hey, I know you don't have your kids on this date. I was thinking about going to this concert. Is that something you'd want to go do with me? I'm like, you already planned it. You know when my child's like when I have my kids when I don't like yes, please. Like like it feels very supportive. It feels very connective. It goes a long ways for sure.
Yes, yes, and that's one thing that they would always say. There was like, Turing, there isn't any follow up, and I would stress. I was like, well, that shows you that the person isn't that interested because it was like a one and done. And I told
Yeah.
them, don't ever fall for the trap that, well, I can come over to your place when the kids are asleep.
Yeah, no. That's a no.
See, she's telling you it's a no, right? So the lady's telling
Yes.
you a no, the man is telling you a no because there's only one reason why they're
Yep.
trying to squeeze themselves into that
Mhm.
situation,
Yeah.
right? But what would you tell? Well, like, it happens to men and women, but what do you tell the women or the men in
Mhm.
this case when the follow up is, I can come over to your place, regardless of the kids or not? Like, speak to us why that isn't, trying to be politically correct here.
It's
Why
hard
that
these
isn't,
days.
yeah, appropriate. I think that's safe. Why wouldn't that
Yeah.
be an appropriate follow up to lunch on a Tuesday?
Right. Well, yeah.
They can't cancel you because you're on my show. They can cancel me. So
No, I'm just I think I mean, we all know, right? Like just know your worth, know you deserve more, you deserve better. If they're going to be like, "Oh no," like they're disguising it as doing you a favor because like, "Oh, I'll just come over to you, like no big deal." But it's like, "No. You ladies, we deserve to be courted. Like, let's like go a little old school, like, but we deserve that. Like, they need to put in effort for you. You deserve that. You deserve to be like shown more than just coming over for Netflix and chill. Okay. Now, if that is what you are also consenting and agreeing to for that, you do you, boo. Like, go for it. But if you are actually trying to have a relationship with somebody and you thought you were connecting and then they pull that, just be like, hey, that doesn't really feel good for me. I would really like to actually go do something together outside of the house. And you could even say, I would say show up authentically and state that, but you could also say like, hey, I've been at home with kids for days. I would really like to get out of the house and do something and spend some time with you. So you could also say it that way. But yeah.
yeah, I think ladies, men, mostly ladies, Netflix. It's it's like when I had Netflix. I don't know if you have it, Brianna, but
Not anymore. We got
I got rid of mine as well, right? But if you
yeah.
remember, there's a time when you had Netflix that if you don't press any buttons, it asks you if you're still there.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what Netflix is chill is. It's watching you doing whatever it is. You're not really watching
Right.
it, right? It's
Yeah.
actually watching you. Train. Are you still
Right?
there?
Like like, yeah, that is so funny.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I'm still here. I may not be in this room, but I'm still
Yeah, but I'm
here. Right?
here, but stop
I'm
judging me.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we close, what final words of wisdom do you want to share with couples who have children? And as we wrap it up, make sure you remember
Mm.
who you were, who you are, and of course, who you want to continue to be. So what advice would you want to give to our audience today?
Oh my gosh, you said that so beautifully. Yeah, like, I think just in life in general, stop taking yourself so seriously. Enjoy the journey. Know that whatever mm, the thing that's wanting to come to mind is just like, um, just give yourself grace in all the things. We are so hard on ourselves. Just give yourself more grace. I think that's all. That's how I want to say that.